Live and direct, live and a date no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Koala podcast. And we're back in California speaking to Avis Bulbulyan, consultant and expert on anything cannabis in California for the last 20 years. And we're both going to talk today at some length about the birth and death of one of our favorite cannabis retail companies, MedMen. Avis, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean.
So look, MedMen are in their final death throes as of this past month. Both you and I have followed them for many years. It was up and down like a yo-yo. I think they spent more money on marketing than Apple at one stage, it felt like. Let's go back to the very beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about the birth of MedMen at the that sort of nascent stage of California, getting very excited about regulated adult use cannabis?
Sure. So MedMen actually started off on the consulting side. Well, initially in California, before we had a licensing structure, we had a collective model. So basically, 3 people get together, they pull their resources together, they file for collective paperwork, they get recognized as a collective, and that's how the whole dispensary model kind of came about. So where MedMen came in was they started forming these collectives and then selling them off as licenses. So they did that a little bit down here in Southern California, and they're getting $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a pop on them. So, but they weren't licenses, they weren't businesses.
They were just ideas for something that might work if regulation came into play at the time. Is that the best way to describe it?
No, not even that. So the way it worked was with SB 420, what happened was if 3 people got together, they could pool their resources together and then create a collective and start growing cannabis for the use of the collective members. So let's say me, you, and somebody else gets together. Somebody puts in the money, somebody puts in the time, somebody puts in sweat equity, and we work together. So when a customer comes over to you, what they do is they sign a collective paperwork joining your collective. They're saying, look, basically, I don't have the resources you have, but I'm a patient and I want to join your collective. And then that model kind of turned into a dispensary model where you can't charge for the product. So what happens is the patient donates to the collective effort and the collective donates meds back to them. So think of forming collective as forming a corporation, but it's not even a corporation. It's a nonprofit mutual benefit corp. Not to be confused with the tax-exempt nonprofit. But basically, it was a couple $100. You can file your state paperwork and you can be recognized as a collective. That was probably as legal as you could get, but it was in no way a license. So they would find these landlords that were willing to lease to collectives. They would form these collective paperwork, and then they would sell it to people that were thinking that they were purchasing a license, but they're really purchasing a collective. So that model then turned into.
And who were those individuals who started? I mean, those particular individuals who started that process.
Sure. So it was Adam Bierman and Andrew Modlin. So both of them started together, and then in Massachusetts is when they really got involved in the world of licensing. So Massachusetts back in 2012, 2013, they were going through their process they were probably the first state that did a competitive merit-based application process for a limited number of licenses. In the initial round, which was announced January of 2014, they gave out 20 licenses. So my group ended up with the highest score. We were the only group that got the maximum 3 out of 3 licenses. MedMen scored in the bottom of the pool. Back then, you only had about 4 or 5 consulting companies. It was my company back then. It was MedMen. It was Denver Relief Consulting, Forefront Forefront Advisors, and there was another one. Anyway, so that was Massachusetts. Massachusetts was kind of like a crash course on state licensing. Immediately after Massachusetts, Nevada comes online with their license types. So in Nevada, all these consultants, everybody kind of started figuring out, okay, state licensing is happening. And let's get involved in the world of that. So the MedMen went on. This was probably one of the first indications of how they would go about building their business through their marketing efforts. I mean, they had a tremendous amount of clients that they were able to pick up in Nevada. So they did
And
Nevada.
how did they manage to get those clients at the time? Was it just they were just really good with the gift of the gab, and everybody just believed that, you know, what they were saying, and therefore would work with them? I mean, what was it? What was their X factor at the time? Because I mean, I came in a little bit later than this, about 18 months later. I was still living in Asia at the time, but I remember when I arrived in Portland around early 2015, they seemed to have the magic around them that what attracted people to them. And, you know, were they just spending a lot of money, or was there something else happening there?
Oh, they were spending a tremendous amount of money. Like I said, their marketing effort was probably second to none. Nevada was a really good indication of how they go about business, whether you're looking at how they picked up business or whether you're looking at how they go about conducting themselves when they do pick up the work. So for instance, for me, it was a big lesson on how the effectiveness of press releases and how to actually read some of these press releases. So for instance, every time they would sign up a client, they would issue a press release talking about how they secured a state license. I mean, the wording was incredibly technical, whereas like they picked up a licensing client, but they implied that they want a license. In fact, I don't remember if it was Nevada or New York, where one of my clients calls me up. He's like, "Well, what the hell? We missed the boat. Here's a press announcement that this company want licenses." I'm like, "That's impossible. They haven't even started the process, let alone issue licenses." I'm like, if you read into it, if you read it technically word by word, word for word, they're just talking about how they signed up a client in that state. But in Nevada, I forgot the number, but they signed up like 20 something clients. So that's how they went about picking up their business. On the other side, when it came time to submit the applications, they're in over their head. So what happened was they rented out this office space. Then they invited all their clients into that same office to compile all their application paperwork. And then that pissed off a lot of the clients. So the clients are looking at each other. It's like, well, what the hell?
And were we aware at that time whether the clients have already handed cash over to them?
Oh, yeah. The cash is paid. They're a day, 2 days away from actually submitting the application. But none of the clients really know about each other. So what was interesting was they have all these competing interests, all these competing clients, all in the same room, all compiling their application. So they triggered a bunch of lawsuits there. One of the interesting experiences was we were in Clark County going through the conditional use permitting process where the county supervisors approve or deny. So they had a guy before their hearing, they had a guy that was going around passing out cards saying MedMen screwed me in California. They sold me collective paperwork for like $60,000, told me it was a license. The poor guy ends up opening up the dispensary thinking he's the licensed operation. He ends up getting raided like a week later. So
And at no point did they, I mean, did they not answer the phones to this guy? So he just thought that he'd just go ahead and do it and it was all done. I mean, did he ever have, when they went through this process with these sorts of guys, I mean, that means people are spending a lot of money. Were they not, did they never put anything in writing? How was it they managed to, I mean, you know, the word is scam, basically scam these people to believe that they had a license when they didn't?
yeah, I mean, on a technical side, it was as compliant, quote unquote, as you could have gotten, but it was nowhere near a license. There was no licensing structure. And back then, information wasn't as readily available. Now there was a lot of gray area that you had to operate in. And it was a big green rush where everybody just wanted to get into the business. So a lot of people understanding that you're not going to be 100% compliant, it's still federally legal, but then you're looking around and you see all these shops open, it kind of gets easy to get sucked into that type of a transaction.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, bottom line, it was straight scamming people out of money. I had a situation. This was in Illinois. I'm working with the client. My client out there is introducing me to one of his friends who's also going through a licensing process. So it turns out that when I bring up MedMen, the guy ends up reaching out to MedMen And they're like, look, we'll pay your money. Like, keep in mind, back then, licensing for a consultant, it was going anywhere from 100,000 to 250,000, 300,000. So you're paying some serious money for this. So this guy ends up reaching out to MedMen. MedMen's like, yeah, we'll do your project. All is good. The guy's like, look, let me see one of your operations and then we'll move forward. So MedMen's like, yeah, great. Come on out to California. So the poor bastard flies out to California, takes a bunch of his staff to California, shows up at the MedMen office, like, okay, let's go. He's like, well, no, you got to pay us a $60,000 or $80,000 deposit. Guy's like, I'm about to write you a check for 250,000. You had me fly out all my people from Illinois down to here to see your operation. Now that I'm down here, you want to hit me up for another 60,000? So it was just a lot of shady business practices.
I mean, well, shady sounds understatement. I mean, we can get on to some of where their money went and everything. So, I mean, essentially, they were taking money off clients and then implying to those clients that they had licenses. And I mean, how come they didn't end up? I mean, they ended up in court. How did they get away with not ending up in the next step after court, which should have been jail for straight scams at that time?
See, right now you have a lot more legal recourse than you did back then in 2013, 14, 15, and those years. And a lot of times what happened was on the state licensing stuff, if you missed out, you missed out. For MedMen, they built it up. They brought in so much money where it kind of ended up becoming like a cost of doing business for them, right? For every one client that's going to come after you, there's 10 that aren't. And the amount that you're charging, they end up refunding some clients. They end up settling with some clients. So for them, it was making sure that there's more water coming in than water going out.
So with Bierman and Modlin, I mean, the next question, I suppose, is they were hiring people. Were the people that they had working for them in this sort of pre bricks and mortar stage, were they in on the game, or were they pure innocents who thought that they were working for a real company?
I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but they were well-meaning support staff. So they have like one of their guys, I forget his name. He was an MBA student and he's going through that program. And if you're looking to get into cannabis, they had a pretty high-profile brand image as a consulting company. Yeah, you get sucked into working there, and they were working there. A bunch of them lasted for several years. Not that they were in on it. The MedMen was one of those companies where it was really tightly controlled, the brand, and directed by Bierman and Modlin. Even when they went public through their RTO, they were probably the only company that was able to maintain supermajority voting control over the company, 2 individuals. So that says a lot. If you can do that with investors, your support staff, they really have no say in it.
So I mean, that leads into the next question. So we've got these 2 individuals who created a company who encouraged people to think that they were licensed operators in various states. Then they sort of became a bigger consulting company. At what point did they move? I suppose we're still in the rise of MedMen, although as we look behind, they're pretty dirty sheets. What led them from becoming that to thinking they could make lots of money out of being? Was it just a retail operation, or was it the standard vertical where they were going to try and control the whole from seed to sale, as they say?
So initially it was supposed to be retail. What happened was we were going through the process in Florida. And Florida, by all expectations, it was supposed to pass. But Florida has a supermajority type of a setup where you need 60%. During the Florida, I want to say it was Amendment 2 or something like that. They had a client. It was a private equity firm. I think it was N2 Capital, N Squared Capital, or something like that. So we're going through the Florida process. And in the last moment, Sheldon Allison puts in a lot of money and defeats the bill. So at that point, sometime right immediately thereafter, they got involved in the world of finance. They picked up a guy, I forgot his first name, but last name was Gannon. He was more of your finance, private equity person. So they came out with the structure of setting up kind of like a fund. And then that's where the ball really started rolling for them, where basically after Florida, the house of cards were going to come crashing down. Almost every single state, they left empty-handed. None of their clients got any licenses. So when you go through Florida. Florida was about to be a big success. It ends up getting defeated at the last minute um, uh, voting. So then they get linked up with this guy who's more involved with finance. They come up with the whole structure for private equity, and then that's where everything kind of just snowballed for them. And they ended up doing the RTO out in Canada and become MedMen, but their primary focus was retail.
And where were they? So where did they start their retail? How many shops or retail outlets did they actually have running? I mean, I remember, well, I'm trying to remember back now, half a dozen in California, Nevada. I remember there was a big song and dance. I mean, the company just seemed to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, as you say, they were obviously they're experts at the press release, and being a journalist and a website owner, you know, that's what I saw from a distance was just press release after press release about how, you know, how well they were doing. And they obviously we can talk about their marketing, because they have an internal marketing team who created all those, you know, quite clever ads, the red, all those sorts of things. You know, there must have been quite a few enablers to help those guys through. Were they just spending lots of money on everybody to make everything look really, you know, because the idea was, I presume, to make themselves look like a cannabis version of a tech company.
Yeah, so for them, what's interesting is when you're in the business of getting licenses, and then all of a sudden, when they came across all that money, for them, they didn't apply for any licenses in one, at least not in those initial days. It was all purchases. So they went on a buying spree, and that's how they bought up all these licenses. As far as their marketing, one thing I will say is their marketing and branding was incredible. The approach that they took to it, they shotgunned out the brand. In the initial days, they were very hyper-focused on retail, and they were very creative with the way they went about their marketing.
Did they employ an outside company to do that for them, or was that done in-house?
I think it was done in-house. I don't think at that point they had somebody, they brought in a bunch of people, but no, I think their marketing, their branding was the brainchild of both Bierman and Modlin. In fact, that's why I said
they're very good at marketing themselves, that's for sure. I mean, I still, you know, I think the only company I can think of subsequent to them who have done such a good job are Cookies in terms of retail and having a sort of brand awareness. I can't think of any other retail company who have that sort of pizzazz about them.
I agree. In fact, I would say that Cookies isn't even 50% of where MedMen was, especially at their height. MedMen, of all the cannabis companies, not just retail, I don't think there was any cannabis company that was able to build as much brand equity and brand identity with the end user consumer that MedMen did. And keep in mind, when we talk about MedMen or any of these companies, there's recognition within the industry, then there's broader recognition across the marketplace with the end user consumer. See, you look at a MedMen, inside the industry, they were a joke. Outside of the industry with the mainstream consumer and the general public, they were a golden child of the cannabis industry. So it's those types of optics that sometimes people misunderstand the brand identity that you have within the community, and they expect that the general consumer has the same observation, has the same perception of the brand. MedMen, I don't think there's any cannabis company back then, even to date, that's
even today, I think you have that sort of brand recognition. And you know, I'm very smart with the colors they chose, the whole range of things. It was exactly right. So, I mean, look, we've been talking about, okay, it's a rather nefarious rise. We've been talking about the rise and the rise and the rise. At what point in California, you said it was a joke within the industry, did the chickens come home to roost? What year are we talking about, and what is it that they did or didn't do that started unraveling them?
So they built a house on a foundation that was never built to code in the first place, and at some point that's going to all come crashing down on you. So yes, your marketing effort got the ball rolling, got you up there, got you the investors, got you the RTO. You have all this money. You went on a buying spree. Initially, they were hyper focused on retail. Then at some point, throughout the whole MedMen thing, it was really more about two individuals living a lifestyle than actually building a business. But
Well,
at the
that's what
same,
I was going to lead to, because it was the big houses, it was the smart cars, the flashy suits, the whole standard, the standard works, wasn't it?
yeah, it was a lifestyle. It was kissing babies, meeting people, cutting ribbons and stuff like that. But it's like at some point you got to go back to the fundamentals and you have to actually build something of substance. So I always told a lot of the investors and people that were reaching out to me on MedMen in the beginning years, I'm like, look, at the first board meeting, you're going to be able to kind of talk your way out of it. At the second board meeting, you're going to be able to talk your way out of it. You're going to sweet talk the board. You're making all these moves. You've got so much momentum, especially in the 2018 to 2020 years. You've got so much momentum in the industry where now you can also point to and say, look how much it's growing. So you can talk your way out of a lot of situations. But at some point, the board is going to hold your feet to the fire. It's like, okay, we allowed you to get away with every excuse. We allowed you to point your finger. We allowed you to talk about the future. But what about now, right? You're losing all this money. When is something going to happen? One of the worst deals that they tried to do was the whole PharmaCann deal. It was supposed to be a big merger. When I was looking at that, I'm like, there's zero. It just doesn't make sense to do that. You guys are a retailer. You've been able to get the consumer. You're that B2C component. There, you have no business getting involved in all these other worlds. So then it got to a point where they're just making deals and doing deals for the sake of doing deals, and not because it makes business sense or financial sense or it feeds into their overall
And what
business.
about their logistics at the time in terms of sourcing product, making sure it was compliant? I mean, was that still a fairly easy thing to get away with in California? There wasn't that much enforcement yet from the various government bodies. So do we know whether everything they were doing in terms of actually running the physical business was kosher in terms of the type of product they were getting in, where they were getting it from, and those sorts of things? Has that ever been discovered?
No, stuff like that was pretty straightforward and pretty clean. They were buying from licensed operations. Their compliance issues, I don't think they had a lot of compliance issues. It was really just more mismanagement.
So it was more on the deals. It was more on the deal, as you say, on the deals side of things, where it was making deals, as you say, for the sake of making deals, but they don't actually lead the company forward anywhere.
Yeah, they were just burning through cash. I had a lot of clients where we would go out, get them a license, and their entire business model was, I'm going to go get license, flip it a MedMen. They were just known for that. Now, at some point, when you're on an acquisition spree, at some point, you got to kind of dial it back and say, okay, well, I've acquired all these assets. What the hell am I going to do with these assets? So when you look at manufacturing, for instance, you got all these MSOs and companies where they built these massive machines, but they have no feeder. They have nothing to feed into the machine. So what MedMen did was they built out the infrastructure, which was all your retail outlets. They also had a brand to go with it. Whereas the current MSOs, they've got the infrastructure, but they have no brand. Like you take any of these MSOs, you take them out of the market tomorrow, or you delist them tomorrow, no one's going to miss the brand because there's no brand equity that was built up.
That's
MedMen,
right.
that's the reason why they're making so much noise, is they had that much influence with a much broader market.
So at what point did the board say, okay, it's time for you to go? And how did they go? Did they fall on their swords? Did they walk out of the door? Did they walk away with a lot of money?
Oh, they absolutely walked away with a lot of money. The bigger issue with them was that it's super majority control over the board, the voting shares and all that. So initially, I think they raised 2 million, and then they raised another 300 at a 1.6 billion dollar valuation. Then when they did their RTO, the price fluctuated. They had contingencies in there, clauses in there where if they hit a certain market cap, they get bonuses. Obviously, they hit that within the first couple of months. They all got cashed out on those bonuses. And then when they weren't, at some point when they had to start answering to the board, one of the first moves that their main financial backers did was like, look, you got to give up your super control. You guys are messing this up. And they really didn't have much choice in that. So it started off with giving up that control. Then slowly they got pushed out and they were forced to resign. It was one of those things where it just fell apart. They got off easy for all
Well, that's
that.
why, and I mean, if I remember rightly, they started doing business they obviously had a lot of money, but they started doing business with other people and buying into, I think, another dispensary chain, if I remember rightly. I can't even remember their name. But I mean, who was brought in? Because it's pretty long time ago since they left. So if we're hearing about the final death throes this month, we've had what, 6-7 years of the company limping along. Who did they bring in, and what did they try to do after the terrible twins had been given their marching orders?
Well, Bierman them, they kind of went quiet for a while. They got linked up with the dispensary group out in Santa Barbara, who came from Colorado. They got linked up with them. They're going to help them do some fundraising, but the amount of damage Bierman's personal brand took, it was very difficult for him to stay on board. And any company that took him on would kind of inherit a lot of that bad reputation. So I'm not sure what happened with that. I don't think it worked out for them. MedMen, the financial backers, brought in somebody to turn them around. The problem with bringing in outside turnaround people that don't have that experience with cannabis is you're going to have the same situation that you had with Bierman, where it's like, look, he's great at marketing, he's great at branding, but he just doesn't connect. You have to have some sort of a relationship and connection with the industry.
I mean, did they bring in, I mean, to put it in old-fashioned terms, did they bring in some suits? And really, they should have had some suits combined with somebody else who had a bit of that, Southern Californian pizzazz about them and had the combination, but they just went directly for the gray suits and started disintegrating the brand, if not at a high speed, but slowly, I presume.
Yeah, I mean, when they first got rid of Bierman and stuff, they still had a chance to turn around the brand. For all the negative reputational damage that they took, a lot of that was just industry reputational stuff. The average consumer didn't really know that stuff. So they still recognized the brand. And there was a lot that could have been saved, but it needed a hard turnaround. It needed a 180 turnaround, not a 360 turnaround. So you bring in some finance guys who are incredible in the world of finance, in the world of turnarounds. But when you're dealing with an emerging market where you need to understand the regulatory environment in different states, you need to understand the ecosystem of the industry. There's a lot that you need to understand to be effective in turnarounds. What they ended up doing was they went to the Excel spreadsheets, they had their layoffs, but it just ended up being a 360 turnaround, going back in the same exact direction. And that's where it just didn't work out. They had
when did stores start closing? I mean, at the height, do we know how many stores they had, and when did they start closing after that?
Their height probably was the 2018-19 years. After COVID, they slowly started dying off. 21, they died off. 22, they died off. And I reached out to their main financial backer back in it was the end of 2020, I think. It was 2020 or early 21. I reached out to him saying, look, you've got all these assets. These are really good assets. There's still brand equity there. Yes, there's a lot of reputational damage that the brand's taken, but this thing can be turned around. You need to be able to utilize the assets. So I want to talk to you guys about either working with you guys or unload some of those assets over to me. They connected me with their main guy out in Canada that was handling it. And then they were already hard set on the way they were going to go about it. And it was already kind of a liquidation move, which obviously took a couple of years for them to finally execute. But yeah, this was around, like I said, end of 2020 or beginning of 21.
So this is where we are now. Is they have declared bankruptcy, and it is finally all over now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty much a fire sale now. Everything's done. They're in bankruptcy. Assets will be liquidated. And even now, there's not much to save, and it's not worth the effort in saving the name and the brand, which is really unfortunate. I'm probably one of the most vocal critics of MedMen. With Bierman as an individual, as a person, not that he's a bad guy, he was just, for the role that he was in, he was not the right person. You bring on a person like Bierman to be a brand guy, a marketing guy.
I was about to say he should have been chief of marketing and given a little bit more power on the board than a marketing guy normally has, because he knows how to get people through the door. I mean, do we know what those two guys are doing now?
I'm not sure. They've been kind of quiet. Like I said, a couple of years ago, Bierman tried to get back in through that dispensary out in Santa Barbara. He was going to help him raise some capital. You'll see him pop up his head here and there, but No, they've been pretty quiet and keeping their head low.
Well, I presume they keep their head low because they did earn some money, and I presume it's banked in real estate somewhere.
No, they walked away pretty comfortable.
What lessons, we've got sort of 5 minutes to go. What lessons are there to be learned from the MedMen? I won't call it a debacle. I'll call it an experience. Parts of it were a debacle, but as you say, they still developed, as much as neither of us are fans of Bierman and Modlin. They developed the best cannabis brand for retail that has yet existed in the US.
There's a lot of different storylines to MedMen. What they were able to accomplish during the time that they accomplished, no other company's really done that. They really did pave the way for a lot of the MSOs that you see today. They did open up the Canadian markets. They did attract a lot of investment dollars to the space, but along with that comes a lot of responsibility, which is what they abdicated and they neglected. So as much influence as they had in helping the industry grow by attracting mainstream eyeballs to it and investors to it, they also damaged it to a point where it's like they're a punchline now. Investors, when you talk to them, it's like that old saying, bid once, shy twice. MedMen burned a lot of investors. So that creates a lot of repercussions for a lot of other people in the industry. When you're in a position and you're considered the leader, there's just extra weight that comes on you. And unless you're responsible enough and accepting of that, you just have to be very mindful of that. So as far as lessons, it's like, look, you can prolong things for as long as you want. You can talk your way out of situations. At some point, you got to answer or stand in front of a firing squad. And there are consequences to everything that you do. There are consequences to it. Be more responsible. Go about it the right way. Treat people right. Be honest in your business dealings. Everything's going to come back to haunt you. Everything's going to come back and bite you in the ass. You're tripping over $1 to pick up a dime. You look at Bierman and Modlin. Yeah, they cashed out. I don't know how much, but they're pretty comfortable. They walked away with more than most cannabis operators can say, right? And in a very short period of time. Now, on one hand, you can say that's great. On the other hand, you can say, well, how much do they sacrifice in future earnings, future market positioning? You look at the whole Schedule 3 conversation now.
They could have created a mega MSO with international appeal over a period of 20 years if they had been a little bit more conservative on the business side of their dealings.
Oh, absolutely. MedMen would have probably been in the #1 position right now to be able to benefit from the whole Scheduling 3 conversation. So it's like, look, whatever you cashed out then, which was not that long ago, which was like 2-3 years ago, what could you have been now? And that's the one word I can use to.
And they could have been of course, they're from Southern California, so they could have been walking the red carpet and holding hands of Hollywood stars, which is, I'm sure, what appealed to them. But they weren't patient enough to wait for that point. They rushed to it too quickly, didn't they?
100%. The one word I would use to describe MedMen throughout their entire journey is unfortunate. They had a really golden opportunity. They had everything handed to them on a silver platter. And in the industry, as much as when you talk about mainstream business, you got the legacy side of it, you need to be mindful of it. You need to understand the ecosystem of it. It can't just be about you. They could have done, besides the dollars and cents, they had a real opportunity to do a lot of really good for the industry, for the industry's future. That's what they squandered away. And that's the unfortunate part, where it wasn't just about two individuals. It transcended a lot of that. And for them, what makes it even more unfortunate is the industry wasn't really receptive to them, because the industry called them out on their bullshit. They recognized the bullshit. For them, as much as they bought their way through a lot of this effort, they kept their head out. They bulldozed through it. They opened some doors that weren't opening, well, even if it was with the power of a checkbook, right? For them to go through all that and then crash and burn the way they crash and burn, really the only word is unfortunate.
Well, that's a perfect way to end. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Thank you very much, Avis. We both love the MedMen story. I'm sure at some point some business writer will write the book on MedMen, because I think that company does deserve the book. Thanks a lot for being on the Karma Koala podcast.
Thanks, Sean.
Live and direct, live and a date, no jive.
Legalize it. I mean, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.